Welcome to the Growth Cat Podcast, where we chat with CEOs, investors, and other key industry leaders to uncover insights and strategies for accelerating growth and succeeding in business. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. In this episode, we chat with Gus Warren, co-founder and CEO of Bindle, a company that is revolutionizing the way health data can be quickly and securely shared prior to entering a venue. A perfect confluence of events led to Bindle's inception, allowing Gus and his 5 co-founders to leverage recently developed technology and domain expertise across multiple areas to solve a very timely problem. Bindle utilizes a self-sovereign identity network to allow individuals to share information, such as test results or vaccine certificates in the case of COVID-19, with stadiums, schools, or even family events that may require such information. The venue then has a certain level of confidence to permit entry, without actually having to view the source data. Thus, privacy is maintained without the need for the venue to attain HIPAA compliance. Gus shares with us the exciting implications Bindle's platform has for both the current pandemic and beyond. He also shares his advice for other entrepreneurs looking to get their business off the ground. We hope you enjoy the show. So Gus, pleasure to chat with you. It's great to see you as always. And, it's fantastic what you've been doing most recently with your latest endeavor. What we typically do here to kick off is just get a little bit of background on yourself. You've got a very long background in the venture community as well as in operations for startups. So let's start off with your background, if that works.
Yeah, sounds good. Great to be here, first of all. Great to see you too. So this is my 5th startup that I've either been an early employee or co-founder of. Of the previous 4, 3 have been acquired and 1 called Disconnect is still independent. We've protected the privacy of over 350 million people, which we're very proud of. I'm still an advisor there. And as you mentioned, in between sort of entrepreneurial endeavors, I've also been on the venture side. So I sort of learned the trade out at Hamrick and Quist in San Francisco in the late 90s and early 2000s, and most recently was helping to run the venture group at Samsung globally.
And now you're in your latest entrepreneurial endeavor, which is actually leveraging, or I shouldn't say leveraging, but you saw an opportunity because of what's happening in the overall environment and the pandemic, and you happen to know kind of all the appropriate people to help get this, platform technology off the ground. Maybe we could start hear a little bit about Bindle.
Yeah, it's sort of one of those rare moments in life where sort of a confluence of events happens and you sort of see an opportunity, you got to jump at it, especially something like this where we think we can really do some good for the economy and society and everything. So the story is, probably the most relevant element of my background is the fact that my dad is an infectious disease doctor. So he ran the department at University of Maryland for years, which is considered one of the better groups in the country. And he and I were talking a lot in February and March about COVID. And he was the first person that told me about all the asymptomatic spread and sort of walked me through the implications of asymptomatic spread with an airborne disease and how traditional sort of responses to a pandemic were not going to work, frankly, nearly as well, especially if it took hold as it has here in the US. And when I was at Samsung about a year ago, we made an investment in a company that allows you to use the smartphone's camera to take a photo of a lateral flow assay test result. So something like a pregnancy test. And so in early April, I had this thought that, if you could combine really cheap diagnostic tests that you could do at home with that capability of the camera on the phone, you'd have a really powerful way to prove to other people that you weren't infectious, or at least unlikely to be infectious. And so maybe we could actually go into shared spaces again with confidence. Maybe we could get on planes and stadiums and arenas with confidence even before a vaccine. And so one of the first people that I called was an old friend from Cornell days, who I've known for years, Stu Whitman, who was had recently left Clear as the head of product. And I thought Clear could be a very interesting potential partner for something like this, right? And he walked me through what he'd been doing since he left Clear, and he basically reunited with some old colleagues of his from American Express. And they had built a data network over the course of 18 months that was sort of perfect for carrying health data like this. And the way that the data network works, it's a new kind of system called self-sovereign identity, a self-sovereign identity network. And what it allows you to do is share health data with a venue, say like an arena or a stadium, without that venue ever getting access to the data. So they don't have to become HIPAA compliant. And so we saw this opportunity that, hey, whether it's a vaccine certificate or a negative test result or a symptom survey or some combination thereof, we're going to need to start as a society, start using health data when we go into places. That's actually going to be part of life moving forward. Mm-hmm. And it just happens to be that this self-sovereign identity network is a really powerful way to do that. It protects the privacy of the person's information and their health data. And it also allows the venue to use health data without ever seeing or handling the data.
And so this is the moment in time where this is, most relevant, particularly with all the athletic events happening, either professionally or collegiate. One might think, well, this is most relevant now. And as you say, it's going to be relevant in the future. I guess the question is how relevant will it be on an ongoing basis? And I'm certain you've thought all this through.
Yeah.
And so, interested to hear your thought on that.
Yeah, we get that question a lot. So there's a few different angles on that. So the first is that I think there's a lot of people that understandably believe that the vaccine is going to be a panacea, and we all want it to be. But the science just doesn't bear that out. I mean, I think this is much more likely to be a vaccine along the lines of, flu or tuberculosis or something than polio or the measles. In other words, there's still going to be people that get vaccinated and get sick with the disease, and they will still be infectious. So there's a real scenario for maybe even years to come. People who get vaccinated will also need to be tested regularly in order to go into shared spaces. And when in our talks with the sports leagues and the airlines and other folks like that, that is bearing out. They believe that they're going to need not only proof of vaccination, but also proof of a recent test. So that's the first thing. We think that there's sort of a longer opportunity in COVID, even with the vaccine. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, unfortunately, this is the fourth sort of virus like this in the last 17 years, sort of novel virus. And if you talk to the epidemiologists and pandemic experts, they believe that there's going to be many more, unfortunately, in our lifetime, maybe even another one in this decade. So we view this infrastructure that we're rolling out as also a down payment on preparing for that next pandemic, because frankly, it's a lot easier to come up with a really inexpensive diagnostic test for a novel virus than it is to create a vaccine for that novel virus, right? And so when the next one of these comes along, we think the playbook's going to be very clear. You lock down for a little bit, you focus on a really good, cheap diagnostic test, and you use a platform, hopefully like ours, to get back into life and back into society and everything. Mm-hmm. And then the third answer is really that self-sovereign identity has been one of these ideas that's been bandied about in the tech industry for years, literally ever since sort of blockchain was first invented. And we even looked at it at Samsung quite a bit because our mobile folks think it's the future of identity. But we could never find the right use case, the thing that would drive adoption of the network, right? And unfortunately for all of us, we think we found the use case, which is COVID. But the implications of this kind of technology are much more far-reaching than a pandemic. So one, it can be used for healthcare information of all kinds. So electronic medical records are a great example of that. But it's also, if you think about it, it's sort of anathema to how Google and Facebook and Amazon think about data, because the way that our technology works is the consumer, the individual, has 100% control of their data at all times. And that data is encrypted with a key that's locked in the secure enclave of their phone. So they are the only ones that can decide to share it. And even if somebody came to us with like a warrant or a subpoena and said, hey, I want RJ's data, we would have no way of getting it, right? We'd have to say, you go talk to RJ. So there's lots of really powerful implications for the technology that go way beyond sort of COVID or even healthcare broadly. And so
we talked briefly about how it actually works, and this will be helpful for people to know. So, essentially from our prior conversations, each individual would actually film themselves taking the test. Do I have that right?
Yep. Yeah. So there are a lot of different ways that the test results can get onto the platform, or vaccine certificates can get onto the platform. One is directly with integrations with the labs and the test companies, and those are underway. A second is if testing is done at home, you can either do a Zoom like this, where there's a proctor on the other side or a notary on the other side, sort of, seeing that it's you spitting into the tube and, there's no sort of fraud there. And then we're also talking to folks about doing selfies, where you literally have to, do a selfie of your a video selfie taking the test. And then, for example, an NBA or a Major League Baseball or an airline may say, we're going to screen 1 out of 10 people coming in and look at their selfies so that there's a sort of incentive not to cheat the system.
And everything, I guess, is time stamped so that they know exactly when it was taken and what the result is. Yeah.
Exactly. And actually the venue can determine what sort of criteria they want to have. So, one venue may say, you know what, I'm okay with somebody taking a test at home with a selfie. Another one may say, I want to make sure that test was done at a lab and the lab is certified and like there's a chain of custody all the way through. Right. And we've made that very flexible on the verifier side, on the venue side, because we think that the implications here, the use cases here are anything from going to a basketball game, like a professional basketball game, to having a wedding. Right. I mean, a bride and groom who know everybody who's coming to the wedding may not require chain of custody of a test result, right? Because they, presumably they trust the people who are coming to the event. So there's a lot of variability on the venue and verifier side. Another great example of that is how the virus is circulating. So you can imagine, a Madison Square Garden may say, hey, I need to know that you took a test within the last 24 hours, right? But a small restaurant in the middle of Bozeman, Montana, with 10 tabletops or something might be fine saying, I'm fine if you got a test 2 weeks ago and you took a symptom survey every day since. So that's the sort of flexibility we have on the verifier side.
Got it. Really interesting that your dad is probably one of the people who's watching all the news and watching what the so-called experts are saying and thinking to himself, they do know what they're talking about or they don't know what they're talking about. What's his view currently and has he, Fauci has obviously been the guy. Mm-hmm. What's been your dad's take on, both the current, the so-called experts today and as well as what his own thoughts are?
Yeah, well, I don't want to put too many words in his mouth, but I think it's fair to say that he's very disappointed at how we've, as a country, responded thus far, right? I think, from the get-go, he was one of the ones saying we're going to need really, universal testing and very frequent testing, again, because of all the asymptomatic spread, right? The symptom surveys and the temperature checks, those are important. But I just read an article today that one study in the UK had 80% of the people that tested positive on a randomized trial had no symptoms at all. Right? So it's like this very insidious combination of airborne spread with asymptomatic infectiousness. And that's just, it's really a difficult combination. So because of that, he was, he would have advocated for, a lot more testing a lot earlier. There's a growing body of thought that these frequent sort of taking a lower sensitivity test on a more frequent basis may be a better approach for us as a country, in addition to the sort of higher sensitivity PCR test that you only take if, you have some sort of symptoms, right? It's the difference between sort of a diagnostic test versus a sort of a screening test, right? And we actually are just in the process of working with statisticians to do some analysis that if you took let's say an 80% sensitivity test every couple days for 20 days, and then you wanted to go to a Major League Baseball game, would the combined negative tests over those 20 days sort of effectively mean that test is not an 80% sensitivity test anymore, but it's actually a higher sensitivity test. That makes sense. So those are some of the ways that I think, my dad would probably argue that we should have been doing a lot of this stuff all along.
And what about kids? This is top of mind because everyone's kids are going back to school. And, what's interesting is normally, and there has been, it sounds like some data around this, that kids are less affected by the virus if they get it. However, I mean, this is anecdotal, but, we had a case here in Princeton where the kid was in 5th grade and actually got really sick. Yeah. So, I mean, any insight there from your end or from folks?
I think it's a very personal decision, what to do with kids and going back to school. I mean, I think the vast majority of school districts across the country, if there is an in-person, if they can go in person, there's also an option to go remote, right? And so I think it's a very personal decision. But it's a really tough one. I mean, I just heard about a private school in Westchester that they spent an enormous amount of money getting ready, getting the kids all back to school 5 days a week. Everything was going well for the first month. And then, a gym teacher went to a wedding where people weren't tested, got it at the wedding, came back, infected the whole gym department, and now the school's closed down for the next 2 weeks. And they may decide just to stay closed through like January 20th, not even bother going back because they were going to close at Thanksgiving anyway. So it's just a very difficult situation.
Right. And switching back to the business, what's incredible too is you've built up in a very short amount of time. You've built a team, and presumably you've done this all remotely or virtually. Tell us about that experience. And like you've recruited some amazing people. I would love to hear about the organization.
Yeah, so we're 11 full time and another 20 contractors now. So it has grown very quickly. I mean, the company was only incorporated at the end of June, and here we are in early October. So it's been a few months, and we've really ramped the team. Yeah, and it's really funny. I sort of joke that there's 6 co-founders: myself, Stu, who's the head of product at Clear, Dan Stoller, who used to be the head of corporate strategy at Time Warner Cable, a very senior executive, is leading all of our strategy and partnerships, and then our 3 colleagues from American Express, one of whom was the CTO of Revolutionizing, which sold to Amex for $300 million. He's our CTO. Our head of product did a lot of big product development at American Express over the years, and then started his own incubation shop, which is where this initial self-sovereign identity network got built. And then our head of customer success and sort of project management, who did a lot of that work as a senior executive at Amex as well. And what's really crazy, so Stu knows all of us and has met all of us in person over the years, right? I mean, Stu, Dan, and I go back 30 years. And he worked with our other 3 co-founders at Amex for 15 years. Mm-hmm. But I actually have only met, this 3 of our co-founders I've only met on Zoom so far. Mm-hmm. Crazy to think about, right? But that's what's happened in the age of COVID. I'm sure at some point very soon we'll all get together and get tested and all get together. But it's been remarkably efficient, I have to say. I mean, we've already got the platforms deployed. So we were approved in both the iOS and the Android app stores just after Labor Day, which was not a foregone conclusion because COVID apps sometimes run into challenges there. So not being in person has not really been a challenge for us yet. And then we've got a virtual team with the other employees and the development team as well. So it's worked out pretty well.
Well, I have a basketball game that I want to watch at Madison Square Garden in December. University of Virginia, where I went undergrad, is playing there. And I think they just recently confirmed that. I was reading it yesterday. What are the chances that regular folk will be able to go in and watch the game? Or is there a chance that the NCAA could be using your technology by then?
Yeah. So what you said, by what date?
I think it's mid-December.
Yeah. So we're in discussions with all the folks that would sort of matter in that decision, but December is too quick, unfortunately. I think what we're talking about sort of seasons next year, right? Basketball season next year, baseball season next year, things like that, where we've heard from folks that the software that we've built is exactly the kind of software that they need in order to get people back into the stands again. But yeah, unfortunately, not by December, man. Can't help you out there.
Gotta try. So let's see here now. Like this will be really interesting for all those entrepreneurial-minded people in our audience. I mean, we've got a good number of those. I mean, your situation is a bit of an anomaly in that you were able to think of the idea and get up and running and start your business and bring in the money in a very compressed time frame. I guess what would be your for others who kind of have the idea and are trying to get something off the ground, what would be your advice? That the common advice is the minimum viable product, right? Mm-hmm. It's like just get something up and running and start testing it. Are you following that type of approach, or because I mean you've been around the block multiple times over, looking at a lot of various entrepreneurs and investing. And so, yeah, how are you approaching this?
We are definitely following the minimal viable product. And I mean, the app that's in the App Store, I should be clear, is not designed to be sort of a consumer app. It's sort of meant mostly just to demonstrate the underlying power of the technology and the network, right? And so, but we decided to get it out there because we wanted to A, make sure we could get through the App Store process, and B, start to get some, pilots on it. So right now, we've got a back to work pilot going right now. We've got some events coming up over the next few weeks where everyone's going to get tested before they go to the event. We've got some production studios using it to get back to making TV and movies again. And then we've got, a huge pipeline of folks with, universities and back to work use cases. I talked about the sports leagues, airlines, things like that. So your minimal viable product, absolutely. Get it out there, get people using it. And, if it's not ready for prime time, then just make it very clear that, it's not ready for prime time, right? I say to everybody that is the app that's in the App Store right now is not meant to be sort of a direct to consumer app. The other thing I will say is that I think a lot of entrepreneurs, when they get started with an idea, they think that the idea itself is somehow going to be, proprietary over the long run, right? And what I always say is listen, if you've had an idea, chances are there's 100 other people who've had it. 10 people may have taken the time to write something down about it. 3 may have had a conversation with their spouse about going off and doing it. And 1 or 2 maybe actually go do it. Right. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is not the thing to keep to yourself. In fact, I say that you should be telling the idea to everybody, because that's how you're going to find people that want to join with you to do this. It's like when I called Stu Whitman and Clear, right? Like who's going to join with you to do it? How are you going to find employees? How are you going to find customers and partners? How are you going to have conversations like this, right? You want to tell everybody about the idea. And that's actually the first thing we did is we created a deck, put it up on, DocSend, right? And, made it very clear in the deck that it's a public document and please send it to anyone you know. And we've had now, I think it's up to 4,000 people view that document. And we've gotten a lot of leads from it, just sort of being, before we even had a website up there, we had the deck out there. So anyway, I think, scream it from the rooftops. If you've got an idea, you want to start a company, tell everyone you know about it.
Other interesting thing, you're a public benefit corporation, it looks like. What obviously, I mean, it seems like an obvious choice, but it's maybe not so obvious, when you get into the details of what that actually means. So, what made you decide to go that route?
Right. So for a lot of people don't even know what a public benefit corporation is. So for the listeners, so basically, if you imagine companies like Patagonia and Ben and Jerry's, and some of us remember the Body Shop way back when, these were all companies that were for-profit businesses and are for-profit businesses, but also had a social mission and wanted to make a real positive impact on the world. And what's happened over the last 20 years since those companies sort of got started is that slowly that concept has gotten formalized. And so now, just over the last few years, the state of Delaware now has something called a public benefit corporation. And what it is it's a traditional sort of C Corp, right, in every way, except, so it's for profit, everything like that, except that the board and the executive team has a fiduciary responsibility, not just to the shareholder, but also to the environment, to society, and that you sort of state what your public benefit is, right? And what that allows the board and the executive team to do is make decisions that aren't always optimized just for the shareholder. They can make decisions that are optimized for the environment or society or what have you, and not get sued, basically. And so it's a way to formally sort of instantiate this idea that for-profit companies can be explicitly designed to do something very positive for the world. And we felt like, especially in this instance, right, we knew we had to be a for-profit company because we have to attract the best talent. We think that that's really critical, right, especially engineering talent. But we also knew that we needed to make it very clear to the government, to potential partners and everybody else that, we were not in here to gouge people in the midst of a crisis, right? And that we were doing this for the public benefit. And so it's just seemed like a really perfect fit for us. And so we decided to do it that way. And it's played out that way. I mean, I think in our discussions with DC and other state governments and things, it matters to them that we've sort of incorporated that way.
Yeah, and it's a trend that's been happening for some time, just the general thought of wanting companies to be more responsible, to society and to the environment and to their employees, sort of a holistic approach to what the business's impact will be on, on basically its entire environment. And so now you're, a few months in and you're hiring a great team. Is this kind of like a sequence of also capital raises to continue fueling the business? There's a long lead time, obviously before you're commercializing, fully. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of technology involved here. So what's the cadence?
The nice thing is the underlying tech, that network, has been built over the last 18 months and was actually commercially deployed before COVID. So it's proven, it's scalable. So we know that, which is great. But there is still a lot of work to do, sort of unique to COVID. In terms of the capital raise, we put out a call for a SAFE, a $2 million SAFE in mid-August. We locked that up very quickly, which is great. We're in the process now of making a decision. Do we sort of raise another $1 million because we've got interest sort of in the form of a SAFE, maybe at a slightly higher valuation, or do we just go right for it and raise the Series A? And we'll make that decision at some point over the next 3 or 4 weeks. And we've already had some inbound interest on the A, and it's been good. The most common question from investors is the question you asked about, hey, what's after COVID, right? Because what's the bigger opportunity here? And I should be clear, we all would have left our jobs to go do this just to fight the COVID problem with this technology. Mm-hmm. We would not have raised outside money unless we thought the longer term opportunity was worthy of sort of venture kind of returns. And the idea here is that this is sort of a Trojan horse into a much bigger play and identity and everything else.
Yeah. And well, one of the reasons why I was like super interested to chat with you and have you on the podcast was because, you're doing something, big here and profound here and kind of meeting the challenges of the time. Typically we have on some fairly sizable companies, but I know a lot of people in our audience will be really, intrigued by what you're doing, particularly the bend towards, helping society. There's a lot of people that, have one lens when they look at private investment, and that's how much money do I make on this deal? Do I make a, 20% IRR? Do I, make a 3x to 5x? Like, what do I get? Right. But in this case, and this is the trend that, I was consulting one of Deutsche Bank's funds, several years ago, and there was a big shift in, particularly the younger generations of these very large family offices where they were actively seeking out investment opportunities in the kind of socially responsible space.
Yep.
So I think this is coming at a great time. Obviously you're, the right person to do it, given, all your connections. Maybe just to close out, where can, folks learn, what's the best way to learn more about Bindle and more about you?
Sure. So website's bindlesystems.com. I can be reached at gus@bindlesystems.com. And the best thing is actually that public deck. So, I'm happy to send that. It's better than our website. Our website's pretty high level. But the deck goes into a lot of detail on the business model, on the team, the whole thing, and the technology. I'm happy to send that to you if you want to send it out to folks. That's great too.
Yeah, we'll post that along with this podcast link. Gus, great chatting with you, and I know our audience will find this super interesting. So thank you.
Thank you, RJ. Really appreciate it.